that would be good.
Recording started.
Okay. Before I forget, the assignment for next week's reading is wrong because we missed that class and everything bumped down. And I didn't even think about going in and changing up the assignment. So currently the assignment reads that next week you should be bringing in a draft purpose statement and a couple of articles for me to look at. But that would have been this week. And next week your purpose is actually due. Alright, so some of you have sent me drafts and I hope that I'll be able to get those back by tomorrow. I apologize, it has been a crazy week. But I think I have half hour breathing space tomorrow. And if anybody else has a draft they want to send me to get some feedback before next week. Next week is, you'll change it by the end of the semester. In all probability, not completely change your idea, hopefully, but you might tweak your purpose statement. So it's not like next week that submission is the be-all and end-all of your purpose statement. That's not what this is about. It's just about, okay, where are we now? Is it going to be acceptable? Right? Is it doable? Do we have the resources? Is it a decent question? Do I know anything about literature that would suggest we already know the answer to that question? All right, so don't get too traumatized by that deadline next week. It shouldn't be too bad. And a couple of peer-reviewed journal articles to support it. You don't have to summarize them or do anything like that. I just need to see the APA, so the purpose statement, and 2 APA references so that I can make sure you're looking in the right kinds of places. Right? Because if I get a purpose statement and the references are Newsweek and Entertainment Weekly, we've got a problem. Okay? So I just want to make sure that we're all heading in the right direction before it's too late in the semester. Just in case you hadn't realized, because I didn't realize until earlier today, next week is midterm already. So that's a little scary. But make sure that you check your midterm grades. They'll go on, so next Monday is the 5th, right? They'll go on, they have to be on by lunchtime on the 12th. So once they're in, make sure you check those out so that you know where you stand. If you've got any questions, you can come back and check in with me. Okay. All right. Last week, Dr. Berkey looked at qualitative research. This week, I'm just going to highlight some things about quantitative approach to research. Some of it is stuff we've already discussed briefly, and I just want to reiterate that, and a couple of ideas are new based on what we discussed last week. Okay, so all right, remember that when we're looking at the qualitative idea, this is going to be interviews with a group, with a focus group, or an interview with an individual. I'm interested in their opinions, in their feelings, in their ideas. When we look at a quantitative approach, we're looking at numbers. Right? I don't care what someone thinks, unless it's a Likert scale. I feel very strongly, I don't care, 1 to 5, Likert scale. I still don't really care about what they feel, I only care which number they circle. All right? So I'm really only looking at a data collection of numbers in some shape or form. All right? Could be speed of something, it could be the weight of something, it could be the change in something. Right? We often see change scores in a quantitative study. And quantitative, so one of the big differences I always think between the two is that a qualitative study, when you look across the whole span of the study, there's not a lot of work at the front end of the study, right? They don't have to find a participant pool. Some of their methodologies mean that they ask the person they're interviewing now to suggest someone else, right? So I don't have to go out and find 35 people who agree to be in my study. I'm not setting up a strong design in the same way because their design is flexible as they go along. Right? They will sometimes change their ideas as they go along. That never happens in a quantitative study. Once the idea is formed, that's the study. Right? You don't change your mind partway through about what you're doing. So there never seems to be very much at this front end in the planning organization stage. However, as she showed you, what they get when they run the study is reams and reams and reams and reams and reams of data. So the analysis, the back end of the study, is very heavily loaded because you've got all these interviews that you've transcribed. You might have 600-700 pages and you have to go through every page and find the same idea that goes through the whole set of data. I mean, severely time-consuming on the back end of the study. All right? When I look at a quantitative study, it's flipped. So we do much more of our work on the front end because the setting up of the study is key. If I want to say these data are valid and they report this, then I have to control for everything I can control for, and that takes a lot of planning. Right? So I have to control for the participants. I've got to make sure that I can access them. I've got to make sure I've got a big enough pool. I've got to make sure they're the right age or the right sex, or there's a lot of organization there. I've got to occasionally control for the environment. So if I'm going to collect data outside, does the temperature that day impact the data I'm collecting? And if so, how do I allow for that? Can I control for that? Or do I have to include that as a limitation when I write up the study? Right? What task am I asking them to do? I can't ask one group to throw a tennis ball and another group to throw a nylite because I lost the tennis ball over the fence. Right? It has to be the same task, it's got to be the same skill. Everything about it has to be exactly the same every time I collect the data. So there's a lot of planning on the front end. That idea of that design, we'd see design in qualitative study, but it's much stronger in a quantitative study. Right? And part of the reason for all this control and all this planning is that what we expect from a quantitative study is to be able to predict a relationship or an outcome based upon something we've collected, or to be able to identify a cause-effect relationship. Right? So I want to say, if I do this training program, the strength gain is larger than if I do this training program. Right? I want to be able to state that, but to state that, that means I have to really have control over what's going on while I collect the data. One of the problems with sometimes trying to compare research articles is that it only takes for one part of the design or the control to be different from another study, and you now can't compare those two sets of data. I mean, you can roughly say, okay, this one said A, and this one ran basically the same study, and they say B. That seems weird. But the basically the same study means you can't make a statement, really, on that comparison. Does that make sense? One of the things you have to decide is, am I going to do within subjects? So am I going to test person A at point X and test person A again at point Y? That would be within subjects. Or am I going to do a between subjects? So I'm going to have a control group who do not do a strength training program, and I'm going to have an experimental group who do a strength training program. And at point Y, I'm going to measure both groups again, and I'm going to take the average of the whole group and compare them to each other. And we would expect the training group to show a greater gain in strength than the non-training group, right? But that's a between subjects because I'm not looking at the person, I'm looking at the group, right? What's the average of the group? My personal preference is a within subjects design because I'm a very applied person, and I think that as soon as you start looking at an average of a group, you kind of negated the point of collecting the data because everybody does something different, particularly if we're looking at exercise physiology. No one does the same thing. So as soon as I average it, I lose the flavor of the whole picture, in my view. But that's a personal view that would not be supported in the literature, all right? So we have to find a population. How do we find a population? We have to do what we call sampling. I have to sample the population. The gold standard is complete random sampling. That means I just get a whole group of people who have no connection to each other, and they fit my study, and they come from all over the place, and this is great, right? Complete random. And if my sample's large enough, in some studies, depending on what data they're collecting, you could be looking at a couple of hundred or more. If it's a survey, there could be several hundred people participating. In my data collection, I'm lucky if I can get 25 because what I'm doing is not that, I can't get hold of that many people. So what I do usually is not quite random, it's kind of a controlled version of random. Instead of contacting all university students at Southwest universities, I've got an isolated population at Eastern. So I'm going to randomly sample my population at Eastern, but that's not really random because it's convenience. It's called a convenience sample because they're right here. Right? So it's sort of cheating, but real random sampling is so difficult to pull off. Right? A convenience sample is very often used. The next way, and you don't see it very often, purposive stratified, we take a sample and we divide them up first before we randomize them. So for example, if I want to look at 5-year-old children versus 8-year-old children, I would get all the 5-year-olds and 8-year-olds first, and then I would randomly put them into groups. right? So that's called stratified sampling. Systematic, toss a coin, right? Anyone who walks by who's got blonde hair, or anyone who walks by that doesn't have tennis shoes on, or every 10th person that walks by, I'm going to ask them if they'll volunteer for my study. And then we come back to this convenience idea. They're all volunteers. So one thing you have to watch out for is, particularly if you're working with athletes, is that you have to be able to state that the athlete or the individual volunteered for the study. That can be problematical when you're working with athletes because coach is standing in the corner of the room. And generally, athletes are quite scared of what coach is going to do if they don't do what they think coach wants. So you have to be a little bit careful if you're going to use an athlete group. There has to be, first thing I would suggest is you don't allow coach in the room, right? Because the athletes have to feel comfortable saying, you know what, I don't want to. I don't care whether it hurts or doesn't hurt, I just don't want to do it. Well, I can't tell you you have to do it. Coach can't tell you you have to do it. So it can sometimes be easier to do that without coach in the room. You may need to promise them that their data is going to be anonymous so coach doesn't know who volunteered and who didn't volunteer. I mean, you have to be a bit creative sometimes. What's your relationship with the coach? Can you tell, can you get the coach to guarantee there's no repercussion if they choose not to volunteer? It has to be a choice, it has to be volunteer. Otherwise you can't get this published, you can't do anything with this data if it's not voluntary. Right? The problem with convenience samples is that you can't always generalize the results. So if I collect data on volleyball athletes at Eastern, can I generalize that data to volleyball athletes at Auburn University that's a D1 and pays a lot more? Right? Maybe I can't, because it could be that this is such a small that this convenience sample has characteristics that specifically go with that group, that mean I can't generalize it across all volleyball players. Right? So this is part of the reason why the planning for a quantitative study takes a little bit of time. The nice thing about quantitative is that once you've planned it, once you've collected the data, running the results, all you have to do is plug it into a database and press a button. So I don't have any of that work on the back end, all my work is on the front end. Right? Because the software is going to run the data analysis for me, all I have to do then is look at the output and go, okay, what does that mean? But it doesn't take any time to run the software. Okay. So once I've got my sample, I've got my group of people, and if you are looking at PE literature, sports science, exercise science, kinesiology literature, that group of people are typically now called participants, not subjects, because they decided that subjects made it sound like they didn't have a choice, and they do. If you are reading a biology paper, they're still called subjects. So that might be because they chop limbs off of cats and things, so maybe they do consider their human subjects. But it just depends which discipline you're reading in as to what that group is called. But from your perspective, when you are writing now, you should call them participants, okay? Because that's professionally the right way to approach it in our discipline. So I've got my participants, I've got this pool of people. Now what do I do with them? So depending on what my design is, I might need them in more than one group. Okay? So how do I divide them up into these groups? If I'm going to have a control group and an experimental group, how do I put my 35 people into two groups? Okay. You can use, there are computer programs that will do random assignment. So you can use that. I've always used a coin. Person A, flip the coin, which group do they go in? Person B, flip the coin, which group do they go in? Right? You can pick out the hat, have all their names in a hat, pick them out of a hat, put them in two piles. Doesn't matter as long as it's random assignment, depending upon the design. Another way of doing it that is sometimes appropriate is matched pairs. So matched pairs can be very useful when we're looking at physiology type ideas, because I can't, if I randomly assign this group of people and what I'm testing for is speed, how do I know I didn't start out with a group of people who were really fast in one group and a group of people who were really slow in the other group? Right? So random assignment wouldn't work there, because now I'm not in control of who's in which group, and I have to have equal ability or technique or whatever it is I'm looking at between the groups in order to say it was my intervention that made the difference. Does that make sense? So matched pairs then comes in very useful, because what I do now is I test them all on my variable. I take the two fastest, the two strongest, the two most flexible, the two most skilled, whatever it is I'm looking at. And I've got person A and B, I put person A in one group, person B in the other group. Right? Then I take the next two. I take person C and D, and I flip a coin. So I don't know which group person C and D is going. I'm going to split them amongst the groups, but I can't it's at random which group they go in. Then I take the next two, and I flip a coin, and I randomly assign them. So that when I've got my two groups, I can say, within limitations, I mean within the boundaries I have, I've evenly divided their variable amongst my two groups. And now this group is not going to get a training program, and this group is going to get a training program. So the difference I get at the end is going to be due to my training program, not because I had all the good people in that group just because. Okay? So you'll often see the term matched pairs in an article in our field. We use that a lot. And that would be, if you see that, that would be part of the design. So on our template that we're using right now, matched pairs could go in under that design. Now when you write an annotated bibliography, you're not going to use a template. Okay? But highlighting that they used matched pairs may be important to the paper that you're summarizing. Depends on what kind of data they're collecting, right? Because that tells me a lot, right? If they're going to tell me this training program worked and then they didn't match pair them, I don't care what they say about the training program. Okay. All right, so we mentioned the different kinds of variables earlier in the semester, so just to go over that a little bit, because again, it's specific to quantitative. They don't talk about variables in the same way in a qualitative paper. Your dependent variable is the variable of interest, right? So this is the thing I'm going to measure. This is the thing I want to see, did it get better or not get better? Or if I'm sending out questionnaires and I want to know how, do you prefer a female coach to a male coach? Independent variable is the thing I'm messing around with. So what am I messing around with? Am I messing around with a training program? Am I messing around with looking at someone that got injured? What's the thing I'm manipulating? What's the thing I'm interested? What's the thing I'm measuring? Okay. Now, when you look at independent variables, maybe more than one level. What does that mean? All right. So, if I have, think of a good example. Oh, okay. So my dependent variable then is physical activity, right? So I'm measuring physical activity, that's my DV. My IV, my independent variable, is PE environment. Okay? But when I'm looking at PE environment, I'm going to subdivide PE environment into an inside gym, outside playground. Okay? One of the mistakes that students often make when they first start reading research, all right, is that you're going to tell me you have two independent variables. You've got the gym and you've got the playground. Okay? But you don't have two independent variables. You've got one independent variable and you have two levels of that independent variable. To have another independent variable, you would want to look at footwear. Right? That would be a separate, now I have two independent variables. But subsections of the same independent variable, okay, are just two levels of that variable. So when you're identifying, later in the semester, when you're identifying your dependent variable and your independent variable for your presentation at the end of the semester, watch out for that, because that often catches people out. Right? And it just takes practice. You know, it just sometimes gets a bit confusing. All these dependent and independent variables get confusing. There's a lot going on. So that's okay. If you're not sure, check in with me and I can help you out. Right? Any questions on that idea? Melissa, how are you doing? Any questions?
No, I'm okay.
Okay, thank you. Yay, we can hear you. All right, let's see. Okay, so our design, we've talked a little bit about design because it's on that template that you're working on. You're looking for ideas in the paper that you're summarizing for independent groups, repeated measures or pre-post. Right, that's part of the design. Am I going to measure this group of people twice, or am I only measuring them once? Depends on what it is you're interested in finding out. You could have a crossover design, you don't see that very often. You could have a mixed methods. We see more of those these days. So a paper where they do some qualitative and some quantitative work. You might see them state that this is just a pilot study, right? Pilot studies are really important sometimes because you want to check your methodology. You don't want to put, especially if it's expensive, you don't want to put a heap of money into running a study, and then when you get the results the other end, you look at the results and you're like, oh my God, these are a complete waste of time because I forgot that. And that cost $2,500 to run that study. And I don't have anything I can use because I messed up. So occasionally, it can be a really good idea to run a pilot study first. Make sure that your methodology works, that the cameras work, that the monitors work, that trying to do what you're doing in the environment you're looking at works. Do a little pilot study, maybe 5, 10 people, and that only costs a few $100s, and then you get data out, you analyze the data, it looks good, you're getting good results, and so you go, okay, I'm going to jump in the deep end and I'm going to fund the whole whopping 50 people and collect my real data. Right? So you're looking for particular terms that give you an idea what they did when they were mapping out this data collection. Right? What was the plan ahead of time? In quantitative, the plan does not change. Right? The plan is the plan. Once you've set it in action, that is what you are going to do. Otherwise, you're junking the study. In qualitative, they change the plan as they go along willy-nilly, which is why she was laughing at me last week, because to me, that's just like, you can't change what you're doing once you, no, right? My advisors would have, right? Just don't do that in quantitative, but they do it all the time in qualitative. You know, they get this piece of information from an interview and they're like, oh, that's really cool. I'm going to go and ask a few more people that question, but that wasn't where they were going in the first place, right? They do that all the time, and that's perfectly acceptable in that area. You cannot do it in quantitative. Okay? Blimey, are we at the end already? Look at that, I told you this was going to be quick. Yay! All right. So, Dr. Berkey mentioned this table last week, and I said it was in this week's folder. All right. So the table I think is quite useful because it compares some of the things you will see between qualitative and quantitative. So what kinds of phrases do you see in a qualitative paper? What would their equivalent in a quantitative paper be? What are the goals? What's the relationship with the subjects? What kinds of tools do you use in a qualitative versus a quantitative? All right? I'm never going to need a tape recorder. Never going to need a tape recorder in my work. I do need a video camera. They might use a video camera. They often use a tape recorder. Right? So just things like that, because if you know where that word fits, it can help you identify, because when you're first starting to read research, sometimes it's like, oh my God, there's all this stuff. How do I know if this is a quantitative or a qualitative paper? I don't know. Right? I know they're collecting data. I don't remember what kind of data. So sometimes the words can help you identify which type of data it is. It just takes practice. All right? So these are just, what's the data analysis? Okay, so if it's qualitative, it could be looking for themes. I'm looking for themes. The themes we identify identified when we looked at this data were X, Y, Z. You're never going to see the word theme in a quantitative study. Right? I'm going to see statistical, I'm going to see ANOVA, I'm going to see correlation. If you're really unlucky, you're going to see regression analysis and modeling. Right? So sometimes just knowing the words can help you out as you're reading. All right, so that's up on Blackboard for you. What else? Let's see. I don't know. Any questions on purpose statements that you can chuck out? Anything going on? Anybody having trouble finding good research papers in the database? No? We have, as I said, we have been having some issues with not blackouts, but electrical surges, and yesterday everything turned off for about a millisecond, and then it all came back on again. If you were in the middle of a database search on your computer, that might have messed up. I know that Blackboard at home, when that happened, has not been working properly now. So somewhere in that electrical issue, the way my computer is reading Blackboard seems to have gone. I don't know, I'm not a techie, I have no idea. All I know is it's not working the way it was before it happened. Right? So things like that, if you're struggling with anything that's outside your control, please, please, please make sure that you let me know so that I can give you extensions. All right? Because if Blackboard crashes, or the data or the library website crashes, I might not know about it, and if you miss your deadline, I'm docking points left, right, and centre. So make sure that if you're running into issues that you can't control, that you let me know. Even if you can control them, let me know, because it might be something I can help with. I'm less worried about the deadline than I am about you guys learning to take responsibility for being grad students. Right? I really don't care. At the end of the day, you hand me in the work or you don't, and if you don't, then you fail the class. It makes no difference to me. Right? The deadlines are there to be fair to everybody in the class, and because you guys have to start learning to meet deadlines. It's part of being in the workforce, unfortunately. We all have deadlines. And there are repercussions if we don't meet them, which I regularly do. Hey ho, that's the way it goes. But you've got to be ready to go, hey ho, I didn't meet the deadline, oh well, what's the slap back? Because there's going to be one. Okay, that's just part of it. So the deadlines are really more to start. I mean, our job is to train you and get you ready to go out to work. Or go on to do a PhD. And in either of those cases, deadlines are going to be important. So, I don't know, what else? Anything else you want to know about the difference between qualitative and quantitative type studies, or? Qualitative studies are often very thick. Quantitative studies typically are shorter to read. That's one of the reasons I like them, because I'm not a very good reader. So I have to use my ruler to read anything. So I don't enjoy reading great big. I just printed off a validation of a tool we're using for our research, and it's 97 pages long. I'm like, oh, you've got to be kidding me. This is going to be bad. Dr. Culpepper's doing that part of the study, so yeah. I don't have to read it, right? If when you are looking at your own, when you're finding papers, if you're unsure what kind of paper it is, drop me an email, right? I can help out. But once we've done the summary this week, you guys are going to start working a lot more on your own. All right, there are a couple of deadlines for submissions of work so that I can make sure at the end of the semester you're on task for 505. But what you're going to be doing after this week is going to be driven by you. Right? What's your purpose statement? What's your question? What's your area of interest? What are you finding in the databases? Right? And then you're going to start summarizing that. Those annotated bibliographies don't have to be exactly the same as the template. There are a couple of things you would not put. Right? You wouldn't highlight the type of study. Right? That's not something you would typically see in a summary. But I felt it was important for you to start understanding the different types of papers, and that's why it's in the template. Right? So when you start that AnnoBibs, you're going to be summarizing, but you're going to be summarizing your stuff now. Here are my articles that I'm finding. What am I going to tell someone about these articles? Okay. The word limit drops, so pay attention to that, because the word limit goes down to 250 for your summary, and at 250 I stop grading. So if half your important information is after 250, that summary is not going to score very well because you didn't tell your reader anything within your 250. So make sure that you pay attention to that after this week. Next week, I believe we have a library session. Let me double check. All right, yes. Next week, we'll meet in the library. I'm not quite sure what to do about Collaborate so that the distance students can contact me if they want to, because I could not get that working when we were in there the other week. If I have time, I'll try and talk to the technician over there and see if there's a particular computer somewhere where I can get Collaborate working. Your purpose statement and your references are due next week, and the other media site. So anybody who hasn't done media site yet, start paying attention, because that's a nice little chunk of free points for just watching a video. Okay? And it's quite useful. The next one is on writing for grad school, so it's quite a useful tool. Okay?
Well, you want our purpose statement due by Tuesday when we meet in the library, so we can...
It's due on the Thursday, so you could bring a draft on the Tuesday if you want to.
Because I was wondering if we have a purpose statement, could we meet with you in your office to go over that, or are we going to do that sometime on Tuesday to kind of go over?
I would like to say you could meet me in my office. But the person in the room that sees me all day, every day, will tell you what your chances of that are like. I would very much like to say come by the office, and you're welcome to, but it's been a little crazy. So I can't guarantee that I'll be available to help you. But Tuesday I will be there in the library at 4:30. So if you haven't called me before that, bring a draft. Yeah, I mean, I believe I am actually going to be in my office during my office hours tomorrow, which would be nice since I'm required to do that, but they keep telling me I have to be somewhere else. But until that, I don't think I have any time until after class at 2 o'clock tomorrow. So. Bring references as well. Distance students, send me drafts of purpose statements and ideas for articles so that I can make sure you're on the right track. As I said, there's nothing wrong with using a Newsweek article or a Sportscast or whatever. You just can't have your entire reference list using those kinds of references. But sometimes, especially if they've interviewed someone and what that person is saying is pertinent to your question about why you have the question, it may be an appropriate article. You just can't have the majority of your articles have to be peer reviewed. Anything else? Melissa, any questions?
No, I'm okay.
Okay. All right, look at that, 5:20. We are done, guys. All right.